Ready to make some cool gifts on your laser machine like this? Then stick around and keep watching. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of James Dean Designs. Now it's my first episode back in the workshop since taking a few weeks off over Christmas and New Year, so it's good to be back in the swing of things. Now speaking of New Year, one of the first celebrations to follow that is Valentine's Day. Whether you celebrate it or not, it is the perfect time of year to be getting gifts out there to sell. Now we did a similar thing to this at the beginning of December with Christmas gifts, and what we're doing now is Valentine's Day gifts on the laser machine. I say Valentine's Day gifts, that can be general anniversary gifts or lovey-dovey gifts anyway, but obviously it's the ideal time to get them sold. Now we've got a lot to cover in today's episode. We're going to be doing some cutting projects, some engraving projects on wood and on slate as well. We're going to be doing all of this within Lightburn. If you're not familiar with Lightburn, check out my beginner's guide up in the corner. It's based on the setup of a 3018 CNC machine, but all the principles apply to other laser and CNC machines as well, and it will definitely get you up to speed with some of the things we're going to be doing today. Now I should also say as well, it doesn't matter if you have a Saint Smart machine, a FoxAlien, an Autor, a Niji. The principles apply to all of them with the things we're designing today, so yeah, it's definitely one for everybody. And the files that I'm going to be using in today's episode, I will link to them all in the description area below. Definitely check it out. I put lots of information, useful information in there, and the links to anything I use in the videos. Now, speaking of links in the description area, today's episode is brought to you by all my patrons below. If you want to get involved with the patron scheme, check out those links as well in the description area. Now with that out of the way, let's dive in and start getting some things designed. So just a quick note on free assets before we get started. When we're doing the type of projects we're covering today, it's useful to have nice selections of fonts available and also possibly some pre-drawn shapes which help us along our way. There are lots of sites out there if you Google free fonts or free vectors. The two that I'm going to quickly show you now is 1001 free fonts, and in here you have a selection of completely free fonts like we can see with the Abbey one, and we have ones for personal use. I'm not going to go into the differences between them, it is fairly obvious, but the same applies over here on Vector Easy. Now what you can see again, we've got free options and then we've got ones that don't have the free available next to it. So you really want to be focusing on the ones that are free and for commercial use, especially if you're planning to sell things. On Vector Easy, if I come up to the search box here, you will also see I've searched Heart Outline. The outline shapes are the ones that you're probably going to find more valuable when we're doing the types of designs we're doing today. If I go back to just searching for the word heart, we'll see that we get some more complex shapes that are not going to really be ideal for Lightburn. So let's move over now to Lightburn and get stuck in. So in Lightburn, I have this configured for my 3018. We have a work area of 300mm by 180mm. Two reasons for this. I know a lot of you have 3018 machines, but also some of the pieces of wood I'll be using today are 300mm by 200mm. So this work area is quite nice to play with. The first project we're going to be making today is a set of keyrings with a personalised engraving on them. Now I've got some shapes pre-drawn out in Illustrator to speed things up. Don't worry, I'm going to provide you all of these files as well. To import these into Lightburn, you'll simply need to come up to the File, Import, and then select the SVGs or the vector files that I give you with this video. But for ease, what I'm going to do is just select this first heart shape to begin with. Now there's nothing complex about these and you can draw them out in Lightburn. For example, this really is just two circles kind of then joined up at the bottom. So there's nothing complex about them. I just draw them out in Illustrator for ease. Inkscape is a free alternative to Illustrator as well, where you can do this type of vector design work. So I'm going to take this, going to make a copy of it, come over to Lightburn and paste the file in. When you click File and Import SVG, it will do exactly the same job. Now I'm going to start by shrinking this down. I want this to be about 50mm high. So we've selected the object, we've come to the size and we're going to type 50mm and hit enter. Because we have the padlock highlighted, it shrinks it down into proportion. I'm also going to drag this down to the bottom left hand corner for my working area and zoom in on this a little bit to make our lives easier. So what we can see straight away is we have two halves of a heart with some kind of puzzle feature in between linking them both together. Now to make this to a keyring, the first thing we want to do is put a little hole for the keyring fixing to go into. So I'm just going to click the circle tool, draw a small circle up here, holding the shift key down in order to keep it proportionate. 3mm hole is good enough, and what we'll do is just position this close to the top of the heart. And then we're going to make a duplicate of that by pressing Ctrl D. And that places a duplicate straight over the top, and then we can drag this over to the side to be in a similar position on the other side. Now in terms of cutting, this is pretty much all we're going to be cutting out for this project. So we're going to come up to the first layer and define our speeds and feeds for this. 300mm per minute is about where I want it to be. I'm going to bring the power down to about 70%. And that should be good enough to cut this out. I want to do 3 passes on it, as we can already see highlighted there. And that should cut through my plywood nice and easy. So I'm going to click OK and have those settings saved. Now I'm going to come over to a new layer, click 01, and then I can click the type tool. And what I'm just going to type out is I'm going to put my name and my wife's name. I'll start by typing my name, and then I'm going to select a nicer font for this. So in my drop down of fonts, I'm going to come down and try and find something that looks a little bit romantic. Little February seems about right for Valentine's Day. And then I'm going to click on the arrow tool and shrink this down. Now I want this to fit somewhere in the heart without coming too close to the edges. Maybe about there works quite nice. Then I'm going to take a duplicate of that again, Ctrl D. Move that up to here and type my wife's name instead, which is Natalie. Now, as we can see, Natalie is a slightly longer name, so that is a little bit bigger than it needs to be for the heart. So I'm going to shrink this one down a little bit as well to fit in there a bit more comfortably. Check the font size of that. We've got that coming out at 8.66. So I'm just going to adjust mine to be the same as well. 8.66. I'll get in trouble if my name is bigger than hers, so good that we balance those up. Now these can look a little bit plain on their own, so what we're going to do is come back over and import the simple heart shape on its own. Press Ctrl C, come over to Lightburn, press Ctrl V and paste that in. Now we want to make sure this is on the engrave layer as well. So we've clicked on that and you can see it's turned into blue. And we're going to shrink this down and maybe put a little heart down here somewhere. Ctrl D to duplicate and maybe put one above my name up on this half of the heart. And then we're going to click off that, take a look at the settings for this layer. It's similar settings because I've already been testing these files out. So we've got a speed of 1600mm per minute and a maximum power of 40%. I'm going to take that down just a little bit. I'm going to make that to 35%. You can turn overscanning on if you don't have air assist, and this will just minimize some of the burn around the edges of the letter. But I'm going to leave mine turned off for now. Line interval at 0.1mm. This means you will have 10 lines per millimeter, which is kind of a good setting. You can take it up or down, and it will naturally increase the speed of the job by taking it up or down in accordance with that. And it just gives you the equivalent lines per inch. Now I'm happy with those settings, so I'm going to click OK. Now what I'm going to do is come up to the preview window. What we need to happen is the engraving's done first before cutting out, just in case the shape's cut out and move slightly. So if I rewind this down to the start, what we'll see now as we play this through, it actually starts doing all of the cutting first. So what we need to do is come back to the layers, and we're going to move the engraving layer up to the top by selecting it and clicking the up arrow, and it will place it at the start now. Now if we come back to the preview mode, we can see that when I wind this back this time and let it play, we will do the engravings first. It will pass through all of those, and then it will start doing the cutting around each individual shape. The other thing I'll point out at this stage, if I click OK and go back into the engraving layer, now I've got fill groups together. Now what I'll do is leave that setting on for a second, and what we'll see in here is it's going to do James first, move up to the heart, do Natalie, do the second heart. Now if I come back and change that setting to something like all shapes at once and come back to the preview, we'll see it's actually going to do James and the heart in one pass together. Now you've got a lot of travel going on in between these. I like to try and do all shapes grouped together. I think it just makes it a cleaner result. So I'm going to come back and put that setting to what it was originally, fill groups together. And we can see now it's just gone back to what it was before, where it's shading in the smaller areas in one go, moving on to the second, and it works round and does all of them. So there we have it. It's a fairly simple project, but let's send this over to the laser and see how it comes out, because they're nice small GIFs that can be quite effective.
So all I've simply done is take them off the laser, run a light piece of sandpaper over the top just to get rid of any overburn marks. We've added the keyring accessories. You can get these in packs of like 50, 100 off places like Amazon. And we have the completed gift. They come apart nice and easy. And obviously because they are laser cut as well, they go back together nice and tight, so it's a good fit. And that's the project done.
So yes, it is a fairly simple project, but don't let your imagination be the limit. You've got lots of variations, and variations means you're giving your customers options if you are planning to sell these, which can make them even more personal for the people purchasing them. And don't be limited again by just doing hearts. We can do some other creative ideas. I'll show you another quick example. I'm going to copy these two puzzle pieces and we'll paste those back into Illustrator. And I'm going to shrink these down again to be 50mm high, so we're working at the same size. I'm going to come over and take a duplicate of both of our names again, bring them up, maybe shrink them down. We want these to be a little bit smaller sitting in here. I'm going to place that one, I don't know, about there. Maybe Natalie at the same at the side of me. Take a couple of examples of these hearts, duplicate again, bring it up, make them nice and small. And we'll make quite a few duplicates of these. Actually, we're going to go Control D, move that over. I'll speed this up a little bit. And then let's add another little something in this gap that we've got going on up here. So we're going to use the type tool again. I'm going to come down to my list of fonts and select my Love and Sunshine font and just type a little message out. And drag this down onto the puzzle pieces. We'll put the two holes in for the keyring hoops, as those are what we're missing. And we'll drag those up. Oh, there we are. And place those roughly in position. I'm doing this very quickly, but obviously you get the idea. And now we have another design. We've got a bit more of a message in it, again, just making it more personal. We often think that we fit very well with our partners. So let's get this sent over to the laser and see how this one comes out.
And the two puzzle pieces that fit together can be taken apart, so you can each have a piece separately.
So simple but meaningful items. That is exactly what we're after for Valentine's Day gifts. And as I say, let your imagination steer what you can create. Now we're going to do another piece that gives the receiver a little bit of a surprise. So the keyrings are nice, but now let's do something a bit different. I'm just going to clean my work area up a bit. Let's get a few things deleted. Now I've just left those two pieces and you'll see why shortly. What we're going to do, as I say, is create a GIF that has a little bit of a surprise inside. We're going to come up and start with the square tool. So I'm just going to quickly draw a square out. I want this to be 80mm by 80mm. I then want to add a radius to the corners just to make it a bit softer. So we're going to come down to the radius tool at the bottom left. 10mm is good enough. And then we're going to go around and click on each corner just to round those off and make everything a little bit softer. I'm going to drag this onto my work area so it's placed a little bit better. There we go. I'm going to jump back to Illustrator and get a pre-drawn shape. Do remember, I'm going to give you all these shapes, so don't worry, it will make your life easier. Check the description area out to be able to download them all. Come back to Lightburn and let's paste that in place. And we're going to drag this down and make sure these two pieces are aligned centrally. So select both of them, holding down the shift key. Then we're going to come to the alignment tools on the top, click center vertically, center horizontally, and we know those two shapes are now in center alignment with each other. The spacing of that is pretty good in terms of the size. Now what I'm going to do is bring this Natalie up here, and I'm just going to click on the type tool again, and we're going to type, go back to the beginning, type 2, Natalie. Now I've got a little bit more space around this, so I'm just going to stretch it out and make it a little bit bigger and just place it in this top left hand corner. Then we're going to take the hearts and we're going to bring these down to fill this bottom area down here and enlarge that up just a little bit. And again, make a couple of duplicates to fill this bottom area out. Move that over, another duplicate, move that over. And so we're not left with too much dead space. Now what I can see straight away is this blue line. This is going to be a cut line. So I want to swap this over to the black layer, the cut layer. So I'm going to come down and select 0, 0, the black layer. And now that's gone to being a cutting option. Now what I'm going to do is take a duplicate of both the cutting piece and the outline. Press Ctrl D again to do a duplicate and move this over to the side. We can put them pretty close together. Then I'm going to come and take a duplicate of the text, bring this down in between the puzzle shape, and I'm just going to type a little message in here to my wife. You're my missing piece. We'll split this in half so it falls over 2 lines. Now we can see we've got quite a big gap there, so I want to reduce this down. This is the V space up here on the text editing area. So we're going to click on the down arrow and just reduce the gap between these 2 words a little bit, so they're a bit closer together, and then reposition this as well so it's sitting inside of this shape. Probably need to reduce the font size down just a fraction on this, so it's, that's a little bit too big, maybe 8.5. That's fine, that's sitting just within the shape itself. Now I'm actually going to delete the puzzle piece around the outside, and you'll see why shortly. I'm also going to take a duplicate of one of these hearts and place that just in some dead space up here and make that a cutout line as well. So we'll swap that back to the black layer. Now you may have figured this out already, but let's get it lasered and put together, and I'll show you exactly what it is, because it's kind of a dual layered piece that, as I say, gives a little bit of a surprise.
So the 2 separate cutout bits have been stuck together to make one piece, and the little heart that was sat on the outside, that becomes the handle to the puzzle piece that can then be removed. So we can use this, take it out, reveal the message underneath, and then it can simply be placed back in and complete the piece again.
So what are your thoughts on that piece? Hope you liked it. And remember, you could easily turn this into a 2-part keyring, for example. So if we delete out these little bits, and you could arguably shrink this down to a more suitable size for a keyring. We'll shrink that text down as well. Place that in the middle of there. And then again, we just need 2 small holes for the keyring loop. So we put 1, I'm doing this very quickly, obviously. Drag that back into place. And then maybe another little one on the piece as well. And now once you lasered that out, you would have essentially 2 keyrings that would fit inside of each other. So another option for you to play with. So let's do one more project with the puzzle piece and then we'll move on. So we're going to delete this out the way. We're going to draw a new rectangle. I've just done that roughly. Let's make this 120 millimeters wide by 80 millimeters high. Oh, that is linked, so it's thrown out of proportion. Let's unlink that and go 120, hit enter. And just drag this back into our work area a little bit. And straight away, this is on the wrong layer, so we want to put this onto the cutting layer. We'll make it black. We're then going to bring some text in, and happy to keep the same font, so let's type out, "We fit together." And that's on the cut layer, but we want to put this into an engraving, so we'll move it over to the blue, so we've got the 2 separate layers again. Now again, I'm going to jump into Illustrator, take a couple of more puzzle pieces, select both of these and move them over. Control C, Control V. And we want to shrink these down until they fit within the outer border that we've just drawn. We'll center that a little bit better within the shape, just move it over a little. I'm actually going to move the font up and just place this under here so we can make it a little bit bigger. Now I'm also going to put our names back into the pieces, so I'm going to come up here first, type in there, and type James. And we'll shrink this down to fit again. Now put it down here where it fits slightly better. And a duplicate again, take it up onto the other piece, and we'll type Natalie here. Now what we're doing with this piece is making 2 keyrings that sit in an outer layer. So we're going to draw in the hole again for the keyrings. Let's just zoom in and draw some little holes for those. So we're going to make those about 3 millimeters again. And we've unlocked this, so we need to link them back up. And position that roughly into the middle. And again, a duplicate And we're going to put that on the end tab of this one there. Now I can see they're both on the blue layer, so we'll swap that over to the black layer for cutting. And there the holes done for the keyrings. Now it looks a little bit plain, so let's liven this up a bit more. I'm going to jump back over to Illustrator and find one of my hearts. There we are. Copy, paste and bring this back in. And again, we'll get this shrunk down, scatter these around a little bit. I'll speed this up just to save you having to follow every step because we've already done this a few times now. Now one thing I forgot is because we're going to have the loop here for the keyring, we need a little gap above it so that that will also sit within it. So we're going to zoom in on this and hopefully you'll see what I'm doing. We're going to use the pen tool and we're going to draw a very simple triangle from that line up maybe to about there and back down on the other side, making sure the lines touch. Then we're going to come over to the node edit tool, select that line again, and then we're going to hover over the top node and hit the S key, S for sugar. And what that does is it rounds that node off. And then we can do is stretch this out a little bit to the one side, stretch this out a little bit to the other side, and it gives us this nice little area for the keychain loop to sit within. I'm going to put that on the cutting layer as well, make it the black line. If we come out, you'll see how it looks. Now I want to take that and put it over on the other side as well. So Control D, duplicate it and move it over to here. And I'll zoom in and just get this rotated and put in position on this one as well. And there we have it. Now I also want to fill some of this blank space around the outside. I've seen this border been done a few times and I quite like it. So what we're going to do is come back up to the rectangle tool and we're going to draw a rectangle within this outer cutting area. So we're going to drag that down to about that size. Now we're going to press Control D to duplicate again, click back on it, and then we're just going to rotate it just a fraction. Click back on that, sorry, then rotate it just a little bit. And then we're going to press Control D again, rotate that just a little bit, and maybe a fourth time just to be safe. Just adds a little bit more detail. And we get this nice border being created. Now we're going to select all four of those and rotate this back up to be square. About there should do it, and shrink that down just a little bit so it sits all within the borders. Now I want this to be an outline, but I don't want it to be a cut line. If I switch it over to the fill area, what happens on the previews, we'll see it just fills it in as a big black space. So we're going to create a third layer for this, and we're going to make this a line. But basically we don't want it to cut, we want it to be fairly fast, just enough to leave a light engraving. So we're going to leave it at 1600 and maybe take the percentage down to something like 40, hit enter. And we can also see our layers are out of order again because the cut layer is now first. So we're going to bump both of these layers up to the top and make sure the cutting layer is last. And now, I mean, these are pretty close to the edge. You can tidy this up if you want to, maybe move things down and just reposition them a little bit better. We'll move all of this puzzle piece work down as well, just by a click or two. So it's not close to the individual lines. Make sure everything's selected and move down just a little bit. Now, if we come over to the preview, we should see how this is looking. And it's going to go around, do all the engraving of the names. So we've got the hearts, the names, then it's going to do those lines around the outside that we wanted. And then it's going to complete the cutouts of the keyrings and the outer line as well. So let's get this one sent over to the laser.
So I think adding that little border around the outside just really makes this piece, it makes the whole presentation of the thing look quite nice. Now also the great benefit to this design is you get three pieces in the whole setup. You get the bit that combines the two pieces together, and you can take that away and then you end up with the two separate keychains. So overall it's just a really nice design to have, and it works really well as a set together.
So for the next project, let's do something that is just engraving in case your laser isn't powerful enough to cut. So what I did was picked up some slate coasters off Amazon. Now these are fairly cheap, you can get them in multiple size packs, but they are quite useful. Slate is a nice material to engrave, and one thing I should remind people of is whenever you're trying a new material, make sure you do some sort of speed and feed test to understand the type of speeds that you can get up to on that material. So these coasters that I've got are 100mm by 100mm. So to start off with, I'm going to draw a square that is 100mm square. So I've drawn that. Let's resize it to 100mm. Now the reason for this is I want to draw an outline of the work area that I'm actually working within as opposed to the full size work area. So what we're going to do in the cut and layers option is turn the output off for this mode. So it means the line will remain, but it won't actually laser anything as a result of that. And everything we laser inside of it should fit within the slate tile itself. Now the other thing as well is these slate tiles have, broken edges around them. So you also want to leave a border within that square itself just to make sure you don't go too far onto the edge. Now I want to keep this nice and simple. It's the joys of Valentine's Day gifts. The simpler they are, the more meaningful they can actually be. So I'm just going to start off with some text. We're going to write up here, again, to Natalie. And I'm going to select a better font than that. Arial's a little bit corporate for this, so we'll use something more fun. Let's go back to those love fonts. We'll use the Love and Sunshine. I'm going to scale this down and fit it up here in this top left-hand corner. I might actually make it fit the whole width of the piece. And straight away, we'll switch this over to a new layer, so it's going to be engraving. It's remembered some settings from we'll quickly change these settings while I think about it. We're going to make this maybe 800, 1800 at a strength of around 50%. We're going to leave all the other settings as they are and click OK. Now I mentioned earlier about using sites like VectEasy to get some graphics. So I've got a nice heart and arrow symbol here from Linsung Studio. So I've got that downloaded. I've got it opened in Illustrator. So I'm going to copy that. Come back over to Lightburn as we've already done. Paste that in. Obviously that's pretty large, so I've zoomed out a bit and scale this right the way down so it's going to fit within our coaster. Now we'll shrink this down a little bit more. I'm also just going to switch it over to the engraving layer number 1 so we can see it a bit clearer on that background. And place that somewhere roughly in the middle. My wife and I are also big Marvel fans, so let's throw a bit of an Iron Man quote in there. We're going to come down and type "I love you 3000." And let's get this positioned a little bit better. So as I keep saying, simple can work well, and it can often mean more than trying to do something big and complex. So let's get this engraved on the slate tile coaster and see how it comes out.
So I think I got the edges just right on this. The top of the T and the top of the N are getting pretty close to the top of the slate, but we've kept it within the boundaries and it's come out pretty nice. The other great thing about slate is none of this engraving comes off. It doesn't leave any residue, so it's in there permanently, and it means that will last a long time.
So it's really easy designing on a square slate format, but what if you've got a different shape, such as a love heart slate coaster? Well, I'm going to show you how to tackle that now nice and quickly. I'm going to drag all this out of the way for the moment. The first thing that you need to do is take a good photograph of the slate coaster, as flat as you possibly can and keeping everything nice and square. I've got one in here already. If I switch over to pictures, scroll down, we should have it. There we are. I'm going to drag this into Lightburn. Obviously that is way too big, so we're going to shrink this right the way down so we can work with it a little bit easier. And let's zoom in back on the page. Now the easiest way to tackle this is to come up to the pen tool and quickly draw around the shape of the heart. Now you don't need to be too precise to this, but you do kind of roughly want to follow the edges of it and keep it as close to the actual outline as we can. I'll speed this up because you don't need to see this done slowly. So with the outline completed, you can click on the background image and simply press delete, and that gives you the outline to your shape. Now I'm going to switch this back over to the non-output layer, the black one, and it'll just fade it back out, but it gives us the outline of the space we can work in. I'm going to drag some of the text over from earlier, and let's do a more modern interpretation. How about a reference to dating apps? I'm glad I swiped right. Some of you may get this, some of you may not, but it's a reference to dating apps and the way people are effectively selected for who you may contact. Now, again, I'm just going to reduce the height down in between these two words, just using the V space up here. Oh, might help if I select it. And let's bring that down just a little bit. Now, again, like the other slate, you need to make sure you leave a good gap around the edge so it doesn't overlap into the rougher areas of the slate. And similar to earlier, I've been onto VectEasy to get a file. I've downloaded one of these arrows from FoxAlien Design. And I'm going to come back over to Illustrator and take this one in the middle. Control C, Control V, back over in Lightburn. Again, it's pasted in huge, but we can shrink that right down. Bring that into the laser, into the heart, and rotate it round. And put it over to the engraving layer, the blue one. Now at this point, I'm just going to delete everything else off our work area, and I'll explain why. Now if we zoom back in on the heart, what we can see down here is this little green dot. This is the start area or the origin for the job. So the laser begins here and then it will go up and complete all these tasks. Now, trying to get this point to align with the heart is going to be pretty difficult because the reference points are quite a bit away. Now, you could try doing it in the centre as well, but again, it's a slightly awkward shape to find the centre. So a way to do it on a heart is to simply select the bottom centre point of it. And as you can see, it's jumped straight to that point. Now, as long as you align your heart up fairly square on your laser bed, this should come out pretty well. If I come up to the preview, what we can essentially see, zoom out a little bit on here, is it starts at this point down here, goes up and does all the engraving, and it should be within the shape of the heart itself. So one thing I actually forgot to do is I traced around the shape of the heart, but I never set the actual size of it. So to correct this now, I'm just going to select everything, and then we're going to take the height of it up to 110 millimeters, which is the height of the heart. Now everything is sized correctly.
So now we've got the two coasters next to each other. Even though I said this doesn't come off, obviously it is quite flat. So what I've done on this one is used a spray clear coat just to give the coaster a finish. And what you can see is it just gives it a glossy effect, makes it nice and shiny, and it actually makes it a bit more contrasting because obviously the slate itself gets darker whilst the engraving still stays quite clear. So it's definitely an option to consider if you are doing slate coasters. Not essential because, as I say, this doesn't rub off, but it just gives it a nice gloss finish.
So let's do one last project. We're going to do a dual layered heart, kind of with an outline with a message wrote in the middle. A bit similar to one of the puzzle pieces we did earlier, but this is kind of a standalone frame where we can write a slightly longer message. So we're going to start by going edit paste, and I'm just bringing in a different shaped heart. Again, I'll supply all of these vectors, and we're going to make this around 120 millimeters wide. I'm just going to bring this into the center a little bit better. Now what we're going to use is the offset tool. If I come to tools and down to offset shapes, we can see straight away that it's created another heart. Now this is selected on inwards. Obviously you've got outwards, inwards and both. We want the outward option for the time being. We've also got a few choices of rounded corners, beveled corners and square corners, which doesn't really do much on this particular option. So we're going to leave it as a rounded corner. You've got a few options here as well, whether to keep the existing shapes, delete them, but I'm happy with how that's coming out for now. So we're going to click OK. Now what we basically have is two different shaped hearts, an outside and an inside. So I'm come to the type tool. We're going to click in here to start typing. I'm just going to write a quick message to my wife. Nice little love note there. To Natalie, roses are red, violets are blue, I hate rhyming, cheese on toast. So let's get this to fit a little bit better in the shape. Actually, I'm going to change the font of this as well. And I'm going to use the Love February, just because I think that one may work a little bit better. I'm going to shrink this down and get it sitting somewhere in the middle of this heart. Now what we can actually see here is the poem itself sits pretty well, but the To Natalie could sit better in one of these top halves. So I'm going to take this part out and sit this in here a little bit better. And then we're going to come up and write the To Natalie again. And sit this just inside the arc of the heart. Now what I'm going to do is select the outer heart, select the text. I'm going to group this together. We're going to create a duplicate. We're going to rotate this 180 degrees round, slide this over to the side. And what we can see here is we just get a bit more space out of the material because we can sit them a bit closer together. I'm then going to come over to the original, delete out the text. And what we'll essentially get is the base file and the outline, which will be the border or the frame, and then we can stick them together shortly. I'm going to reposition this on the material a little bit better. Now, as you can see, we had a bit of a blank gap in this one half of the heart. So let's do something to fill that. We're going to take a copy of this inner heart, press Ctrl D,
Then we're going to shrink it up, make sure it stays in proportion. And then we're going to bring that down so it's just sitting on the edge of that heart. Now what we can do is select these two lines together. We can then come over to one of these combine tools. Now we can see when it cuts that out, it's just going to have this extra little shape here, just filling some of that dead space. Now, as earlier, we need to rearrange the order of these layers and take the fill layer up and just check the preview, see how it's looking, make sure it's engraving all the text first, then outlines. Pretty happy with the settings and speeds that we've already got in place, so let's get this cut.
And so the two parts of the heart have been cut out. The material moved slightly when it was just lasering at the top of these two letters, but you can hardly see that. I've also added an oak stain to the outer ring, or the frame as we'll call it. So as this places on top, it'll just give a bit of contrast and make it stand out a little bit more. What we're going to do now is just add a few drops of Star Bond around the edge of this, stick the frame down to it, and that will complete this piece. And there we have the finished piece. So there you have a few ideas, and each one only took a couple of minutes to create within Lightburn. Now what I would say is use these as a base, but don't just make these your only designs. Use your creativity, and I'm sure you'll come up with some great designs that you can sell as your own products. Now I have no doubt some of you are already thinking, what can I do about some of the black edges from where pieces have been cut out? Well, you have a couple of options. The first thing is make sure your laser settings are as good as they can be and optimized for cutting, and make sure you're using some sort of air assist. It will minimize the amount of black soot you get on the edges of these pieces. You can also use something like a dry cloth to wipe around the edges and remove any excess soot that may be on there. The other thing is, a bit like the slate, you can choose to clear coat these items as well. Use a spray clear coat. The reason a spray works better, if you try painting a clear coat on these, you run the risk of smudging the engravings that we've done, because obviously there can be a bit of soot in there, so you may end up with smudge marks all across the pieces. So if you're going to clear coat them, spray clear coat is definitely the way to go. So we've created a good 5 or 6 GIFs in today's episodes, but obviously the principles that we've learned, we can do a lot more with them. Definitely tag me on Instagram and Facebook and let me know what you are producing. I love seeing everybody's work after watching these tutorials. Now if you did find today's episode useful, please give it a thumbs up. Make sure you're subscribed if not done so already. It allows me to keep making these tutorials for you. Now thank you for watching. That is everything for today. Final thanks always goes to my patrons, and I'll see you all on the next episode.